Hello and welcome to the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast, Series 2, a set of special episodes to celebrate the release of 66, the new album from Paul Weller. Now, ahead of our huge box set of special podcast episodes, which lands very soon, I wanted to chat to journalist and author Will Hodgkinson on his Mojo cover story with Paul Weller. Now, Will is chief rock and pop critic for The Times. He's written for The Guardian, The Independent, Vogue. He's the author of many, many fantastic books. He's been part of Mojo magazine, writing for those guys for around 20 years now. And what he got was a very special conversation at Black Barn with Paul Weller in the studio, talking about the latest album. And he also connected with people like Noel Gallagher, Suggs, Steve Craddock, Jake Fletcher from the band as well. So we're going to hear all these stories. Let's get into it. Will Hodgkinson, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Lovely to see you, because I've been digging into your article. I mean, I always read these articles with a bit of jealousy. I mean, and it feels a little bit lighter this year in the sense that I've been involved in some of these conversations. I got to interview Paul, so that's good. But usually I read these things and I'm like, oh, damn it, I wish that was me.
You know what? I've interviewed him 3 times. The first time was okay. The second time was in lockdown. And it was really hard because, obviously it's at the end of a Zoom. It was early days as well, and nobody knew where it was going, and it was kind of quite tense. And this time, now I don't know if it's because when you do an interview, you don't know if the interview goes badly, you think, oh, I've done a terrible job. But of course, it takes 2, and sometimes some people don't like being interviewed. Paul Weller's quite cagey, traditionally. And, I think journalists are seen with suspicion. He's like nosy neighbour type. Do you know what I mean? Like, what are you looking at? Why are you poking around? Wasn't like this at all this time. We did some of the interview in a photo studio where they're doing the cover. And he came up to you and, you look like Sid. And I went, not Sid James, I hope. He went, no, Sid Barrett. And I was like, okay, fine, I can live with that. That's good. So that's a good start. And then we got chatting and he was fine. And then I get the impression with Paul Weller is that he's probably got big trust issues, because the first interview was fine, but it's kind of quite on the level professional. But then going down to Black Barn Studios and hanging out there, and he couldn't have been more open. So it's like I passed the test and he was like, just spend all day. Well, basically spent a day there, and they were rehearsing for the tour. And I just asked questions a bit in between, but I didn't do an official interview there. I just chatted. I sort of chatted to Steve Craddock, and I think I spoke to Jacko Peak and a young guy called Jake Fletcher, bassist. They're really nice. And it was like, okay, fine. If he's here, we can trust him. Do you know what I mean? So I was just kind of sitting in the corner and trying not to be too obtrusive. And then every now and then I just chatted. And it was great. It was really good. And he was, very easy. But I think, it's been kind of on the press of this album, and you can kind of hear it. I mean, he is just about to be 66. He's probably just mellowed out, So I think that's an element of it too.
You talk about trust in the article, actually. You talk about that, this feeling at Black Barn that once you're in is how you described it. When I read that, I was like, oh, I do hope so. Having been there, I do hope so. The thing you said as well, and I saw this, we had a little back and forth on, is it Twitter or X, or what we're calling it these days? You said, so pleased to have interviewed Paul Weller for the latest Mojo, not least because we got to talk about the relative merits of Lee versus Wrangler 60s denim jackets. The important stuff.
That's true. So I can fill you in on that. I turned up wearing a really nice Lee denim jacket, which I'd found at a vintage fair in Bethnal Green. I'm not a mod, but I would say I've got a chronic inability to adapt to the modern age. And so I've always been stuck in the late 60s and early 70s. He looked at it and went, oh, yeah, nice jacket. Yeah. And he had one himself. And it turned out that he's got his own design. He's got his own range of denim jackets. But I think he erred on the side of Levi's, and the mods out there will be able to tell me more about this. But I think Levi's was kind of reclaimed as it was a kind of rockers jacket, and it got reclaimed by the mods. Famously, I think the Who would wear Levi's jackets. I can't remember who wore Lee. This is the stuff I should know, really. But we did talk about clothes, and I really like talking about. I like clothes. I like secondhand clothes. We got chatting about that, and he had a very nice, I think it's called a Henley shirt, which is like the 3-button. I bought a Henley shirt from this I mean, I don't know if this is interesting to you. I bought a Henley Shop shirt for this.
More than you realise, Will, more than you realise.
Yeah. So this brilliant stroke ridiculous shop called Clutch Cafe in Great Portland Street, which is insanely expensive. I mean, they've got like, sort of, I think they're called, what are they called? They're the Japanese style kind of satin jackets, like tall jackets. There's a word for them. Souvenir jackets or something. I can't remember. They're selling for like £2,000 and stuff. And it's all new. It's all like recreations of old American workwear. And they had this Henley shirt in there, which I bought. It's ridiculous because it's basically underwear. And I bought one for £110 and then came out and thought, God, I'm insane. And I got talking to Paul about it. He's going, no, good choice. That's like, okay. Nice. He's got a bit more money than me. So, he was good at talking about that kind of stuff. I think he's someone, and this is my impression, I think it's probably shared by other people. He doesn't like, obviously he's very bright and a brilliant songwriter, but I don't think he likes to intellectualize. I think he's got a fear of coming across as pretentious, or maybe it's just the way his mind works that he expresses himself best in songwriting. You know what I mean? Rather than talking. Funnily enough, the person who in a really weird way, I think is similar is Neil Young, because Neil Young is, even though he's like a hairy hippie, he's kind of, he's got the same drive. He's always moving forward. He's always working hard. He's an inveterate songwriter. It's like he can't stop himself. And they both kind of got their own perimeters. So, they do push forward, but at the same time, it's within the world they know. And it's kind of reflected even in the clothes they wear. It's like, Paul's a mod, but he's not like such a strict mod that he'll only ever have a feather cut and a pair of desert boots. He goes beyond that. And it's kind of the same with Neil Young. It's like they've got their parameters, but they're definitely artists and they're always pushing forward, but within their own framework. So that's kind of who he reminded me of in a weird way. And again, Neil Young isn't someone who's very easy to interview because he doesn't like articulating the meaning of songs or anything. Again, once you get to that trust level, he's good.
You talk about the story of this album. So these two sessions, how far apart were they then? So you had the photo studio session, and this is after the album's been done, presumably. We're not halfway through, right? It's all wrapped up from his point.
Oh, yeah, it's all wrapped up. I got sent the album before doing anything. I really liked it. I was really impressed by the variety. I don't think it's typical for him to work with other songwriters. And it brings in a new energy, maybe a bit more of a relaxed energy, because you've got to allow Noel Gallagher to, you can't start kind of messing around with his words, or Bobby Gillespie, or who else is on there?
People like Suggs, yeah.
Suggs, best songs on the album, I think. The two Suggs albums, amazing. Nothing and Ship of Fools, beautiful. It's a really interesting album because it's quite reflective, I thought. And then I'll tell you one story. Ship of Fools, first song on the album, I said to him, and last year I published a book on 70s sing-along pop called Imperfect Harmony, which is a kind of social history of sing-along pop, taking it seriously. And I said the Ship of Fools reminded me of that early 70s sound with like people like Cook and Greenaway and Tony McCauley, that kind of novelty pop kind of sing-song thing where it's very cheerful melody that, mums and dads and kids and grannies like. And I said, yeah, and it kind of reminds me of a song that a guy from The Creation wrote, thinking that would be a nice way. And he went, don't mention Grandad. Don't mention Grandad. And of course, I did think it sounded like Grandad by Clive Down, which was written by, Herbie Flowers, the bassist, but also Kenny Pickett, who's in The Creation, obviously a mod band. So it's like, don't mention Grandad. But I think he kind of liked that, actually. Yeah, I'd heard the album, and then these two interviews were very close. They were like few days in between. He was great. I mean, especially at Black Martin, once I was there, I said, listen, do you mind if I just kind of sit in the corner? And he said, no, sit over there. That's from Abbey Road, that seat. You can sit on that. It had like a kind of cracked vinyl cover. I said, yeah, I think George Harrison sat on there. Yeah. So I said, okay, fine. Well, if it's good enough for George, it's good enough for me.
Nice. You talk about in the article and just now actually, so these collaborations, and Paul's, this album's got more than ever before. I think there are actually 3 Paul songs, if you like, that he hasn't collaborated with I suppose Charles, but he hasn't collaborated with anybody else on in that sense. Everything's co-writes, which is really interesting to hear. And I love the idea as well. And this is obviously the point of the podcast, the box sets that we're doing. I'm interviewing as many people as I can involved in the album as well. And likewise, you did the same in the article. So we've got interviews with Noel, we've got interviews with Suggs. She talks about the touring band, Steve Craddock, Jake Fletcher, and all those. So you're digging into everybody that's involved as well. So let's talk about Noel, because there's a little breakout section with Noel, and he's got some amazing stories about Weller generally, but in terms of his involvement in this album, it's ridiculous how quickly that song came together, isn't it?
Really quick. But you've got to remember, Paul Weller is his hero. And he's got a touch of like kill your dads, do you know what I mean? Kill your fathers. So he's always taking the piss and calling him the Victor Meldrew of pop or whatever, but he really likes him. And more than likes him, I think he really admires him. You know, he said in that interview, he said, well, whatever you think about, he mentioned Neil Young, he said, whatever you think about Neil Young and Paul Weller, those guys are as real as it gets. He would never do Town Called Malice Part 2 because it was commercially viable. He just wouldn't. You know, he would never reform the Jam because they could play stadiums. Do you know what I mean? He just wouldn't do that. And that's why he gets so much respect. That was the thing, one of the things I took away from Noel Gallagher. But it was interesting. I didn't talk to everyone. Suggs was really good, really funny. And the good thing about these people is because they've been very successful in their own right, it's not like they're in awe of Paul Weller. They can be honest about him, but that's better because that's seeing him as a real person. Therefore, the respect is deeper because it's not like just worship, you know what I mean? And so, you know, they both understood him and they're both kind of, you know, Noel Gallagher said, oh, yeah, he's tricky, don't get me wrong. They were fond of him and Steve Craddock said something interesting. Quite a funny guy, Steve Craddock. I'd never met him before. He's quite sort of sardonic, that kind of Brum humour. He said, you know, what really, really hits you about Paul compared to other people is that it's just the songwriting just doesn't stop. Whether it's just a working class work ethic or it's just something within him that he just can't help. But he said it just doesn't stop. They just keep coming. And that guy, Jake Fletcher, said he only got the gig because he was meant to go on tour with the Specials and he lost his passport. Paul needed someone, and then he had a day to learn 27 songs. I mean, that's a sign of Jake Fletcher's talent as a bassist that he did, but it's also a sign of Paul's kind of, well, you know, of course, yeah, you can learn 27 songs a day. What's the problem?
Yeah, why not? You know? That sounds completely normal, yeah.
Yeah, of course. It took me about 2 years to learn 27 songs. It was interesting because I think when I did this piece, much more than when I've done interviews before, because this is a lot of depth. You know, it's a Mojo cover story, 5,000 words. I realised that the cliches about Paul Weller aren't quite right. You know what I mean? The Mod Father, that name doesn't really cover it, or it suggests someone who's stuck in the mud or whatever. That's not the case. He's a very, very forward-thinking guy, a very engaged guy, very politically engaged. Yeah, like I said, he's got these parameters and this kind of the mod ethic which he lives by. But that's actually about, as he sees it, is about pushing forward and doing your best, not just being traditional and thinking, oh, it's all rubbish now. You know, that was very impressive. Yeah, so it was good, a good experience.
You also talked in the Suggs connections, talked to Paul about, or Paul talks about madness. And actually Suggs mentioned this to me as well, where Paul can't get his head around the fact that they're all writers within Madness. So when you're creating an album, you're all, you know, everybody gets a couple of songs and stuff. And he was like, he just can't get his head around that or wouldn't like entertain that in any way, shape or form. But he talks about in your article about the fact that kind of the comparisons between Madness and the Jam and that camaraderie that Madness have. I think it was a dysfunctional family, I think is how he describes it, right?
Yeah, he does. And that was interesting for me because, you know, when you were a kid and you listen to Jam records and they're really exciting, you know, there's something quite a playground band, the Jam, and quite a playground band Madness. You know, when you're a kid and it's like, they make life seem exciting in a way that you can understand as a you know, a boy of 10 or 11. I definitely thought that the Jam were a gang. In my mind, they were like this, you know, they were from the suburbs and I felt like they were coming into town and they were attacking it and they were just unstoppable and they wrote these amazing songs and it's like their complete unified front. And of course, there are only three of them. But that wasn't the case, I've since found out. They came together, you know, the Jam changed, as you know, from the very early days. It wasn't the gang that I thought it was. With Madness, they were a dysfunctional gang because they really were childhood friends. It's quite fascinating with Madness that there are 2 or 3 amazing songwriters in that band because those songs to me sound like Kinks songs often, you know, like really amazing, very British, touch of musical, touch of sentimentality, and then alongside the kind of upbeat ska stuff of the very early days. So you could understand it with Paul Weller that, you know, you get these songwriters who are just brilliant and that's, you know, they go off on their path. But with Madness, it's different because there's more than one. But of course, what Suggs pointed out is that they don't get on particularly well, or they love each other and hate each other. I think that's probably better. You know, he said they fight all the time, always fighting, always falling out. Probably there's too many of them, you know, it's unwieldy. So, you know, that was interesting. I think Paul Weller felt, this is me reading between the lines, I don't think he stated it, but I think he felt a little bit jealous or sad that he never had that, you know, that he never had that gang. But of course, he's never going to have that gang. He's not that kind of person. He's very amenable when but I just don't think he's not someone who's just going to slip into the gang. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, I think even that kind of I think Paul talks about this element of control that he likes on his music, and which is why it's remarkable there are so many collaborations, and he's kind of obviously feeling looser around that as well, isn't it? But the other thing on it as well, where was it Suggs said to me about the opening song, Ship of Fools, and the fact that when Suggs first wrote it, it was about the bandmates, but actually Paul's interpretation of it was, what he said about it, Boris and his cronies, I think was how he phrased it to me. But yeah, Suggs in a room slagging off the bandmates, I think was how he started that as a poem, right?
That's right, which is hilarious. And then the other song was really interesting, that Nothing, which was written by Suggs's friend, his old school friend. And that to me is a very Madness song, in a way, even though Paul did it, because it's about the sadness of losing childhood, and they're saying it's saying when we had nothing, but it's about the happiness of when we had nothing and we didn't need anything. We had each other, and that was all that counted. And you lose that as you get older, even though you may become successful as Suggs did and Paul Weller did. So that was an interesting thing. And I felt there was a kind of nostalgic element which really worked for Paul Weller. He talked a lot in the interview about nostalgia, actually. He talked a lot about being really young and how important it was to see the Beatles on television. And then you grow up and you kind of you just can't help but lose that. That was interesting to him say that. So there's that element too. So yeah, Suggs and Paul Weller, you would not put the two of them together. Seem very, very, very different characters, but you can see this. You can see the comparisons. Suggs, as you know, is very quite cheerful and funny, big boozer, quite kind of pub guy, where Paul's much more is sharper and doesn't drink anymore, and it's like, he's on to the next thing. So yeah, it's interesting to kind of speak to both of them, definitely.
You mentioned the Beatles, and you see this in the development of the music and the constantly pushing forward, and the fact that Paul doesn't understand people who take kind of years off between albums and all that. But he talks to you about the Beatles setting the benchmark for the right approach to music, was how you phrased it, which I thought was really lovely.
That was interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a huge Beatles fan, that goes without saying, but it was the idea that the Beatles kept changing that he was interested in. I mean, the change that the Beatles went through was incredible. When you think of the space between, Help to Rubber Soul to Revolver to Sgt. Pepper, what's that, a year and a half, 2 years? It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. So I think he really admires that. He really admires, and the quality of the songwriting, the amount that's captured in those 3-minute songs. Then, of course, he said, well, it'd be horrible if they stayed together. They'd imagine synth pop, imagine Beatles going synth pop. It'd be absolutely horrific. Nobody wants that. When he split the Jam up, and this is something I didn't talk to him that much about. I think I have kind of mentioned it in the past. It's definitely been mentioned. But I've always often wondered how much with the Style Council he was trying to do something completely different, but how much he was winding up the more reactionary elements of his old fan base. Because, the kind of homoerotic video for Long Hot Summer where, it's Brideshead Revisited, isn't it, basically? I mean, it's such a huge difference from the kind of punk energy of the Jam, that very masculine, very kind of speed fueled. And suddenly they're kind of chilling out as if they're sort of up, the couple of toffs, sort of who've fallen in love with each other. I mean, it couldn't be more different. So I wonder, you might know more than me about this, you probably do, but I wonder how much was a deliberate rejection of everything that went past and kind of almost a test of people's limits,
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We didn't talk about that too much either, actually. I think it's something to touch on. But I think he has talked about the fact that maybe they went too far with, I don't know what you call it, like the Mickey taking, the poking fun at the industry and all that kind of thing, and lost a bit of focus around the music, perhaps, certainly towards the end of the Style Council from like the Orange album onwards and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. This came up, actually. I don't know if you heard him on the radio this week. So he was on Zoe Ball and Lauren Laverne on Radio 2 and then Six Music. And he talks about the similar thing which you covered in the article, which was his fascination around new music and this take of, I love that, is the fact he feels like his head's going to explode sometimes. And I think he talks about on Lauren as well. It's like, there's so much in the world that he just wants to soak it all up, and he can't because there's too much of it.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because as you get older, it's absolutely normal for you to kind of know what your favorite records are. And my job is reviewing albums every week, and so I listen to them, often like them, but very rarely go back to them. I'll go back to Forever Changes or whatever, Neil Young's Harvest and all this sort of stuff. It's really interesting he pushes forward in that way. And I was told before I met him, completely unconnected to the article, that he's got an account at Rough Trade for a lot of money every month, a few £100 every month. And what they do is they do a list of recommendations. And so some he'll say, give it a punt on that. Some he'll say, want this, whatever. So every month he's buying a load of records, which is brilliant because he's supporting young artists for a start. and supporting the shop, which is really important. I'm a great believer in physical music. I think it's a much happier form, actually. So it's really interesting that he does that. And he mentioned, or other people actually have mentioned, that quite often, like Black Barn Studios is not a commercial studio, it's his studio, but he does let young bands use it. I think the Mysterines, they might be one of them. There's a few young bands who...
Lucy Rose has just recorded her most recent album.
Rose. Yeah. So, some interesting stuff. And if he thinks it's good, then, so he's supportive in that way. I think that's probably part of the whole character thing of like pushing forward, not resting on your laurels, not getting lazy, and not being that guy in the pub who's going to go, oh yeah, it's all rubbish now. You know what I mean? And I hear it all the time from my friends. It's like, oh, there's nothing good on anymore. It's so much better than, It's like, well, if you were 17, it'd probably be great now. You know what I mean? There'll probably be fantastic things you're discovering. It's just that it's never going to have that same excitement that when you're a kid. I really admire him for that, actually. I think that's really good. I think it's for someone who's kind of so embedded in a certain aesthetic, which is associated with the 60s. It's really great that he's still, obviously the Beatles will always be his favourite band. He'll always love the Kinks and the rest of them, the Faces and all those bands. But it's really good that he's still really interested in stuff. And often it surprises me. Like, I think he's just going to say a kind of, a sort of guitar band, and then he'd come up with some like Nigerian band he'd be listening to. Or, it's pretty open-minded, I think.
It is that thing of like, where are you discovering that music from? And also, like, he's got young kids, but where are you getting the time for all this, man?
Yeah, I know. He's got a few kids, hasn't he? So no, I mean, I think it's good. There was one line, do you remember in the article where he said, it does my head in, then I have to go into the garden.
Yes,
stand in the garden. I was like picturing him in the dark in his garden, just standing there staring at the trees. Yeah. Like kind of going, oh, my head's exploding.
There's too much music in the world. There's too much music in the world.
I can't handle it. Too much.
The other times you interviewed him, so one was on Sunset, which would have been during that lockdown period then for the Times. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. That was really early lockdown. Well, I can't remember the month that came out, but it must have been like April.
Yeah, it would have been, April, May. So, 2020. So, it would have been really early lockdown then, yeah.
Yeah. So there was that. That was really weird. I remember him saying to me, because I was really freaked out by it. I didn't like it at all. I was very unhappy. And I was really worried because, I mean, I'm a music journalist. And so I thought, well, what kind of a career am I going to have? How can I keep it all going? How can I pay the mortgage? But more than that, I was really freaked out by the whole thing because there's just no precedent. I'm sure everyone was. But I remember speaking to him and I said, oh, my God, this lockdown. He went, yeah, but isn't it nice? And I was going, is it? And he went, yeah, you can hear the birds singing. And I guess it kind of was nice for him because it was an enforced period of having to stop. And he's obviously got the character that doesn't stop if he can help it. So he will be on tour. He will be making a new album. He will be rehearsing. It's never going to stop. And so to be actually forced, it seemed like, to me, I hated it. I hated being forced to be stopped. But I think maybe he found it then. This is early. And remember, the sun was shining in that weird period. Do you remember?
Yes, that's right. It was beautiful. We got that hour out every day. We were allowed to run around or whatever. It was glorious, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was weirdly utopian, but it kind of felt like the end of the world at the same time. So, yeah. And then the first time I interviewed was for The Guardian. It was years ago. It was a very straightforward feature. It was just about like favourite records and things.
Oh, this is Soundtrack of My Life, yeah.
Yeah, that was right. And that's quite a long time ago.
Yeah, 2008. So this would have been around 22 Dreams time. I don't know what your feelings were on that LP.
Do you know what? I can't remember. I wish I could. I haven't listened to it for a long time. So I don't think I got back to that because I went back to a whole load of his albums for this one, but mainly that great run of records that he's done recently. And On Sunset, I really liked On Sunset, actually, which is quite mellow. Everyone's saying this is a mellow, but On Sunset's mellow, isn't it?
Well, also you had True Meanings directly before that as well, which was fully acoustic and orchestral, right?
That's right. Yeah. True Meanings. That run I got. I think what's 22 Dreams like? I can't remember.
Double album, and it's very eclectic. It does take a journey all over the place, and I think it's Paul really kind of going, do you know what? I don't care anymore. What people think of me, because I think it'd come off the back of that, probably that Mod Father thing of dad rock and all that talk about Paul at that time, and his dad being very ill at that point, and him just going, do you know what? I'm just going to make an album that I want to make for me, and then people loved it. It went to number one and stuff, and it was a huge success. But it was definitely the handbrake off, if you like, and I'm going to make an album that I want to make. Yeah,
I have to go back to it. Also, it's quite fun to go back to, because I knew the Jam stuff inside out, but it was quite fun to go back to the Style Council, because at the time, I'm 54, so how old was I then? I guess I was about 14. I don't think it was my thing at the time. I thought, I was like, oh, I don't really want to hang out. Well, I can't hang out, smoke a cigarette outside some, like Soho brasserie and,
drinking cappuccino. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't do it. I just don't, I've just put away my BMX. I mean, I just don't think it was like for the jam, it was like, yeah, brilliant. And then suddenly it's like, what? You know what I mean? But now I really appreciate it. I mean, some very beautiful songwriting on those albums. And actually, it was interesting when I went to see him the other day. Did you go to the Shepherd's Bush concert?
I did, yeah. The opening one,
and then Mick Talbot came out. Great. There's that connection. You see, you could never imagine him getting together with Rick Butler and Bruce Foxton, but there he was with Mick Talbot, which is interesting. It's not like he burns his bridges entirely.
Yeah, actually, thinking about the lockdown, as you said that, the front cover talks about Paul saying, I've realised how precious time is. And I think that's one of the things that's linked to it of actually, and I don't know if it was in your article, but certainly I've read recently, again, he's talking about calming it down. Is this the moment he stops? I think he's constantly always thinking that kind of reflective period during lockdown and how, spending more time with the family and all that maybe has made him think about that type of stuff a bit more, right?
That was a point that Noel Gallagher made. It wasn't something which had occurred to me because the lockdown was now, I mean, can you believe it? It was 4 years ago, It hadn't occurred to me, but he said, well, we all went through a reflective period during lockdown because you're sort of thinking, how do we get here? Where are we? What's going on? And of course, we all have more time on our hands. So I had taken this album as much more about a kind of relaxing of Paul Weller's approach. And so obviously working with other songwriters, as you pointed out, being older, I think he says in the interview, I'm not going to be here forever. I want, I've got young children. I want to spend time with my children. I want to spend time with my wife. And, those realizations that we all have, I think. So there's that element. So lockdown hadn't occurred to me, but of course it does make sense. And I think he did write quite a lot of the songs during that period. I mean, he's pretty much doing the music himself, wasn't it? It's the lyrics that like Suggs and Bobby Gillespie and everyone have come in on. The sounds, the music, all that stuff. So you do have a song like Nothing, which is, very gentle and reflective and thoughtful in the musical style. So I guess that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and the amount of times he said to me, like, he'd got the lyrics and then it fitted with the music that he had. So yeah, the music, these music beds, if you like, that he was creating were more mellow. Although Noel Gallagher said about the fact, he said to Paul about it being mellow, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. And he went, whoa, what are you talking? He's saying it's boring. So, classic. There's a great story that he said, this is back in the 90s, and he said there was an open-top Mini driving around Marylebone in the late 90s. Noel Gallagher and Paul Weller, it's a thing, it's like, that's quite a big deal. And this kid was on the zebra crossing and he stopped and kind of gawped at them. And, Noel Gallagher was like, okay, let him take a photo or whatever, or, he'll come and ask for a photograph. And Paul went, oi, what are you doing? Get out of the way. So he's quite a Mickey taker of Paul Weller, Noel Gallagher. I think within that, definitely within, because it's like, he's the guy. Do you know what I mean? He's the guy he's always looked up to.
Music, obviously, for you is a massive passion. I mean, the fact that you can do it as a career and a job and write about the music that you love, right? Working for the Times. You've been working for Mojo and doing stuff for Mojo for quite a long time, over 20 years, I think now, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, what is it that fascinates you about this world? I was going to say industry, and I suppose it is in a sense, but that's not the passionate bit, right? The sounds that you hear and the music that's being made. What is it that you love about that?
It's the personalities. It absolutely is the people. So yes, I love music, but it wouldn't interest me if the point is the reason. These are songs for a start. It's not the same as. Although I like a lot of jazz and everything, but these are people who there's something within them, which means that they have to express themselves in a musical form, and everything goes with that. So you meet someone like Noel Gallagher or Paul Weller, or I'd love to meet Joni Mitchell. I mean, there's, the list goes on, and you've grown up being fascinated by their music, but they're very, very rarely, it's incredibly rare for them to be boring people. They're fascinating people, and it's not because they're well known. There's plenty of equally fascinating people whose characters are such, often very talented, but their characters are such that they can't get out there and can't play the game necessarily. But it's definitely the personalities is really at the heart of it. And I'm always hoping to tell a story. That's what I'm interested in, and try to get a sense of the person. Because, as a journalist, you don't go in and see what other journalists are doing. You're always in a situation where you're doing the interview on your own, and there may be a photographer or a PR somewhere nearby, but you're not there with other journalists, apart from press conferences, which is a totally different thing. So my approach, and for rightly or wrongly, I don't try and go in there and ask incredibly difficult questions and put them on the back foot, because I think, well, then they're going to clam up. My goal is to kind of have a conversation with them and hang out and then get a sense of the person. So it's just people. That's really at the heart of it. And that goes all the way back to childhood, like growing up in a house where my parents didn't really care about music at all. And then, you start discovering it in, I guess, 11, 12, that sort of typical age. I remember getting the first album I ever bought was Searching for the Young Soul Rebels, and I'd be 10. And it's because I'd heard Gino on the radio. And it's like, who are these people? Like what? That cover of who's this guy? Is that the lead singer? Obviously it's not. It's someone in Belfast, I think, in the height of the Troubles. And then, you listen to the music and you start looking at the liner notes for clues. It just absolutely fascinated. It's just this world that fascinated me. So that's never gone away. So that's really at the heart of it. I enjoy writing and I want to try and explore writing, but it's definitely the people. But of course, it's the people, the music you really like is you're going to bring that passion to it. It's harder when you don't particularly like the music, but you're interested in the person.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing I found is like, obviously I've been a Paul Weller fan. I got 66 like yourself, got that in advance because I was interviewing Paul. And there's a bit when the We transfer comes over, you're like, what if this is the one? What if this is the one that I don't like? What if this is the one where he's lost it? And then I have to interview him and have a conversation because it's much harder if you're not into the material, right?
It's going to be hard. Yeah. Then that's when the journalist kicks in. Do you know what I mean? That you're just, you're there to kind of, find the information, report back. Because I'm working day to day and doing interviews all the time, it's impossible for me to be passionate about everything. I'm often into, not necessarily that it's bad music at all, but it just doesn't connect with me. A lot of pure pop or stuff, it doesn't do it for me necessarily, but often they're could be interesting people, or sometimes not. That's the other thing. Quite often it's like, that sort of pop music, which is like not massively interesting because, of course, it's been made by lots of different people. And the person fronting it is just a charismatic figure and not always massively interesting. So the songwriters like, Neil Young, Paul Weller, these people, they're always going to be more interesting because if you've written all that material over 47 years, that's a lot to draw on.
Before recording, you mentioned what you've been up to this week or just finishing off on. And you're a published author as well. We should say this. So it's not just the brilliant articles in the magazines and the newspaper and so forth. Writing fuller work. I mean, 5,000 words to me sounded terrifying when you mentioned that then. But it's these bigger projects. And you've just finished your latest book, right?
I have, yeah. So this is coming out in September. It's called Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. Now, Lawrence is the one-time singer of an 80s band called Felt, and then a band called Denim in the 90s. You've probably heard of them.
Yeah, I love Denim. They were great.
Yeah, Denim, exactly. Very talented guy, but then things went badly wrong with him at the end of Denim. He had a breakdown, basically, and then he became a serious heroin addict. He ended up homeless. When I say homeless, I mean on the streets, not like just bouncing from house to house. It was really, really bad. In hostels. And in the last 10, 20 years, he's been rebuilding his life. Brilliant character, very eccentric. And I got to know him about 20 years ago. So I knew him throughout the whole disastrous period when he was, made homeless and everything. He's now kind of trying to, he wants to be like the world's first pensioner pop star. He's always been dreaming of having a, number one hit single. So I followed him around for a year. It's not a memoir or a biography as such. It's an observation, because he's so eccentric. And so because he never made it, he's very much on the street. Not literally now, he's got a flat, but he engages with the street. You know what I mean? So he looks strange because of all the drug addiction and stuff. And, like the kids at the bus stop might shout something at him. One time he got mistaken for an old lady and an old man wanted him to come sit on his knee. Things like this happen to him all the time. So I just thought, I've got to do a book on this guy. So I did. He read it. He went absolutely mental. And it's like, you made me, I can't say, imagine the rudest word imaginable. That's what he said I made him look like. And now he loves it. He's calmed down. It was just a shock, Now he thinks it's great and he's really behind it. So, which is a massive relief. I was thinking, okay, fine. Well, Neil Young hated Shaky, which is this brilliant book, which came out, which is about him. Obviously, Neil Young's slightly more famous than Lawrence, but I thought, okay, fine. If he goes against it, that's part of the story. But he does really like it now. So that's what I've been doing. It's a year. So it was January last year until December. And it's building up to him recording a song. And we're trying to find, there's made a sculptor, a very good sculptor called Corin Johnson, made a giant bust giant marble bust of Lawrence. We're trying to find a home for that. And it's all building up to kind of getting him out there again. So that's what it's about. God knows what people will think of it. But he's a very eccentric character, very brilliant songwriter, but doesn't have the thing that Paul Weller has or Paul McCartney has, where they know how to get it out there. You know what I mean? And they can present it and they can tour. Lawrence is just too, I've got to have to say, mentally ill to be able to do that. But so he's kind of an outsider artist, I suppose, but a brilliant one. Yeah, so that's what I've been up to.
Wow. And when will that be out in the world?
September, yeah, soon. Yeah, Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. It almost killed me. I almost killed him.
He almost killed you on the Samsung as well.
He almost killed me, but I almost committed murder.
Yeah.
That'd be bad, wouldn't it? I mean, I guess that would be good for press, but not really for my life. So yeah, it was great in the end. It was really good. But he's honestly, he's such a good songwriter, which makes me realize, you know, the people that make it, yes, they're very, very good, but it's more than that, isn't it? Why has Paul Weller been so successful for so long? He works really hard. You know, he doesn't stop. You know, albums come out, not all of the albums do well. You know, some of them come and go, but, you know, you can guarantee he's always got an audience. And I think to come from that end of the Star Council period when the house music record, which nobody even wanted to put out, and then he had to rebuild his career. And he's still pretty young then, wasn't he? What, in his early 30s?
Yeah, it was, yeah. But the industry thought he was all washed up and it was like game over and he's done, you know. Yeah,
and here we are, you know, speaking now in 2024. So that's a sign of someone who I don't think it would ever matter with Paul Weller, if, you know, how successful he was. I don't think he's ever someone who'd just retire or think, well, I've done it now, you know. It's like he's not someone who's just going to do it for a few months of the year and then like look at his stock options for the rest of it. You know, it's at the heart of him, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Hey, look, this has been such a joy chatting with you. I do have one final question for you. Yes. So you're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Star Council or solo. What would you go with?
For childhood reasons, I'm going to go, I know it's really obvious, but for childhood reasons, I'm going to go with Going Underground, because that song was when I was 1979, was it?
80, but yeah, around that.
80, right. So I was either 9 or 10 when that came out. And I just remember hearing that song. My brother bought the single, actually, and just being so amazed and trying to work it all out. It was really mysterious to me, you know, and I didn't understand, you know, lines like, you know, they're selling kidney machines for rockets and guns. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it meant something important. So I mean, it's just an incredible song, isn't it? So yeah, I'm going to have to go with that.
Yeah, I liked in the article how you were talking about that, actually, the Eaton Rifles and those types of songs that Paul was writing at that time, and the fact that he couldn't write those types of songs now. He'd feel like he was repeating himself. But also, I guess the sad thing is those songs have as much meaning as they do, what we now, 44 years later on that one, Christ.
It feels like they've got even more meaning right now, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, with, you know, serious wars happening in you know, Israel, Gaza and Russia, Ukraine. And you think, well, what's changed? You know, the whole war machine he's talking about in that song. So, yes, I didn't understand. I think there's something magical. It's really great when you're a kid and you don't understand songs, but they mean a lot to you. And, you know, you understand them as you get older. And Going Underground was definitely, you know, just had so much. I think I could understand Start a bit better, or even though I didn't know anything about Girlfriends, you know, but I mean, you know, I could kind of see where he's coming from with that one, or In the City, I could kind of understand, but I couldn't understand Going Underground, even though now it doesn't seem complicated, but, you know, I didn't get, where Underground, what, you know, on the tube? Where's he going?
I had the conversation with Noel Gallagher recently for this series of podcasts, and he was talking about where Paul got him up very last minute, like between the moment that Paul comes off stage and the encore is when he usually would say to Noel, come on, get up and do a song. And it was the first time he said to Noel that he had to come up and we can do Malice. And Noel said to me, it's like, nobody knows the words to Malice. It's like, yeah, we all know that bit, stop apologising, and that's about it. And he's like, and he was like, but he said that when he did get he got the words up on his phone, and, you know, before in this 10-minute break, whatever it was, and he said, at that point, it's like, oh my God, the songwriting is just unbelievable. Like those lyrics and like just incredible from what was a really very young man writing at the time. And a man who, as he says in your article, it's not particularly well read. You know, he's not somebody who likes books at all, right?
That was really interesting. Very, very articulate. Also, as a songwriter, I mean, those songs are the way in which the words connect with the hooks that we all know. It's incredible. It's very, very tight songwriting. I'm always interested by people who say, you know, you think it's completely different, and then you'll find out that just trying to write a Beatles song or whatever, do you know what I mean? You know, that kind of stuff. Or they're trying to copy Ray Davis, and it came out differently. But there is something in Paul Weller's style, I mean, especially in that jam period, the later jam period, you know, the Town Called Malice and Going Underground in that period, when they were just brilliantly constructed songs, which can contain so much socially, personally, is all there. And then, of course, the way that's the other thing that fascinates me about Going Underground is the delivery, you know, the way he clipped the lyric. He's so angry that he couldn't even get, you know, some people might say my love is in a but, you know, it's like just like being punched in the face. I mean, you know, it's kind of amazing. Remarkable songwriter. And again, you said earlier on, I mean, I was thinking Modfather, but you said dad rock. And that's the term which was always thrown at him in the 90s, and him and lots of other people. But of course, that's just a sort of denigration, which is easy. You know, the only reason he's around for this long is because if you actually look at the songs and analyze what's going on, there's so much, you know, it's so clever. It's the opposite of reductive or boorish or any of the things that dad rock's meant to be, because you wouldn't be around otherwise. You know, you wouldn't have the following that he does. And that's, like Noel Gallagher says, that's why he commands so much respect.
This has been such a joy. Thank you so much for your time. And look, this is fabulous. So, you know, this article is great. Everybody needs to get the latest Mojo. It's brilliant. I mean, the pictures and that are beautiful as well. Proper in-depth article as well, like 10, 12, 13 pages, I think, right? I
know. Thank God for Mojo, you know, and long may print continue, because you know, it's a totally different experience, you know, holding that magazine and you know, spending time with it.
Yes. Yeah, there is that. Exactly. Yeah. There's only so much you get from scrolling at things, right?
Oh, yeah. It's totally different. So, yeah, no, I really enjoyed doing it, actually. I really enjoyed the time I spent with Paul Weller. And of course, now I've realised, you know, classic mistake. So, you know, may never hear from him again. That's fine. It's work. We did, you know what I mean? He gave me the respect to give me all the time I needed to do that. Doesn't mean we're going off to the pub together. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it was work. And
yeah. I know what you mean, because I keep looking at my phone wondering when the music recommendations that he's sending to everybody else start coming through.
When are you going to football with him? Come on. You know.
Thanks so much for your time, man. Loved it.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
My thanks once again to Will Hodgkinson for joining me on this episode of the podcast. You can grab that Mojo special right now. It's the July issue of the magazine. Paul Weller talking 66 with Will at Black Barn Studio. Also find show notes for this episode of the podcast on my website, because there's details about the book that Will has just finished. It's just been announced today, just gone on sale. It's called Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. Sounds great, doesn't it? You can find out all the details on my website, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. And whilst you're there, why not head into my store? Grab yourself a virtual coffee. It's paulwellerfanpodcast.com, and spread the word on social media. It all helps to find new listeners to this show. And a little reminder, make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because we're about to drop a huge box set of interviews all about 66. And what an incredible lineup we have for you as well. Episodes with songwriting collaborators Noel Gallagher, Suggs, plus his best mate Chalky. We got Dr. Robert from the Blow Monkeys, Tom Doyle, White Label, Christophe Vallon from Le Super Armade. We got bandmates Jack O'Peak, Tom Van Hill, Ben Cordelia, and newbie Jake Fletcher. We also chatted to contributors ranging from Paul's old mate Steve Brooks to Josh McClory, the horn section of Steve Trigg and Dave Boriston from Stone Foundation, backing singers Louise Marshall and Samadou Jayefaleka. And you even get to hear the full conversation between Paul Weller, Pete Paphides, and the legend that is Sir Peter Blake around that 66 album cover. That's not all. We've also got an ultra exclusive in-studio chat with engineer-producer Charles Reese about the creation of this special LP, an episode that's packed full of surprises. All coming very, very soon. Our story of 66 continues. Find out more, paulwellerfanpodcast.com. Wherever you get your podcasts, because we're about to drop a huge box set of interviews all about 66. And what an incredible lineup we have for you as well. Episodes with songwriting collaborators Noel Gallagher, Suggs, plus his best mate Chalky. We got Dr. Robert from the Blow Monkeys, Tom Doyle, White Label, Christophe Vallon from Le Super Armade. We got bandmates Jack O'Peak, Tom Van Hill, Ben Cordelia, and newbie Jake Fletcher. We also chatted to contributors ranging from Paul's old mate Steve Brooks to Josh McClory, the horn section of Steve Trigg and Dave Boriston from Stone Foundation, backing singers Louise Marshall and Samadou Jayefaleka. And you even get to hear the full conversation between Paul Weller, Pete Paphides, and the legend that is Sir Peter Blake around that 66 album cover. That's not all. We'll also got an Ultra exclusive in-studio chat with engineer-producer Charles Reese about the creation of this special LP, an episode that's packed full of surprises. All coming very, very soon. Our story of 66 continues. Find out more, paulwellerfanpodcast.com.